Sure, we have some breaking news. A Florida jury has found Ryan Ruth, the man accused of trying to assassinate Donald Trump last year, guilty on all counts. Joining us once again from outside of the federal court in Fort Pierce, Florida, NBC News correspondent George Solis, and former assistant district attorney in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office, Catherine Christian. She's also an MSNBC legal analyst. Bring us back inside that courtroom, George.
Yeah, Katie, within the last few minutes, we just got word that Ryan Ruth was found guilty on all 5 counts by this jury. It happened after about almost 2.5 hours of deliberation. As I mentioned when I joined you a little bit earlier, the only question the jury seemed to have was about the weapon itself and the ammunition. That required the jury to go back into the courtroom. They got to get a closer look at the rifle and some of the ammunition. What was discussed, we don't know, but we know that shortly thereafter, the jury came back with that guilty count for all 5 of those counts. And to remind everyone, we're talking about the counts here of attempted assassination of a major presidential candidate, possession of a firearm in furtherance of a crime of violence, assaulting a federal officer, felon in possession of a firearm and ammunition, and possession of a firearm with an obliterated serial number. This was all laid out in the closing arguments by the prosecution, by the government today. Pretty well thought out. It was very well presented, meticulous. Ryan Ruth also had an opportunity to lay out his closing arguments. Judge Eileen Cannon giving him essentially a wide berth, despite him going off the rails, essentially, with evidence that wasn't presented in the case, basically talking about his character, things that were objected to by the prosecution. Judge Eileen Cannon allowed him to continue, giving him a 5-minute wrap-up well before his hour and 45 time was allotted here. Then the prosecution had a rebuttal, which took about 20 minutes. Then the case quickly went to the hands of the jury. And again, as we are getting information from our producing team that was inside of this, a lot of emotion, it sounds like, during that verdict once it was read. We're getting more of the specifics here. But again, we're hearing guilty on all 5 counts as the rain here begins to fall. So it's going to obviously be a kind of a messy walkthrough once some of the family and people start to leave the courtroom. But more information as we have it, Katie. But again, that is the major headline here. Ryan Ruth has been found guilty on all 5 of those counts.
I have some of those details. This is, again, from, as you said, our producing team inside the courthouse. They say during the verdict, Ryan Ruth's daughter started crying, saying, quote, "Dad, don't do anything. Dad, I'm going to get you out." Apparently, Ruth seemed to be struggling as he was being restrained by the marshals. The daughter also screamed profanities at the judge. Again, this is Judge Eileen Cannon in the middle of the courtroom. Catherine, if you are a judge, how do you consider a man who's been found guilty, but also like this, but a man who's decided to represent himself? How do you take that into account as you consider the sentencing? Do you?
Well, he had every right to represent himself. And it is true that a lawyer who represents himself has a fool for a client. But under the law, he had a right to represent himself. And she, Judge Cannon, tried to be very fair. She gave him a lot of leeway, but did not let him, as your reporter said, take the trial off the rails. She might consider what his lawyers, if he allowed his lawyers to represent him, I'm sure they would have probably tried to assert some type of mental illness defense, which certainly he didn't. But it was clear, and obviously federal trials aren't broadcast to us, but just from reading what happened, he clearly, was himself off the rails, but he had a right to represent himself.
As I am being told right now by the producing team, we're all trying to get this information. This is why George was struggling there for a moment. There's word that Ryan Ruth tried to harm himself, maybe stab himself with a pen as he was being restrained by the marshals or taken into custody. And the daughter tried to stop him. Again, this is per Carmen Gonzalez, who's in the courtroom. Ruth started stabbing himself in the neck with a pen once the verdict was read, seemingly trying to kill himself. And that's what made the daughter have this outburst. Catherine, I've never covered a scenario like this. Have you encountered a scenario like this?
Yeah, there you go. I was saying that his lawyers would have asserted some type of mental health defense, and clearly what you just described shows that there's something wrong with Mr. Roth. And this is not the first time I have seen defendants in court act up, get upset when a verdict comes in, try to hurt themselves or others in the courtroom, sometimes their own lawyer. So it's not shocking, but it just goes to show the type of person Mr. Roth is. And I'm talking about in terms of if I were defending him, that would be the tack
you would have
I would
asserted,
take.
maybe be innocent by
I would
reason
have
of
tried that.
insanity.
Yeah, or that he was just not really, he could not form the intent because of his issues, but that never happened because not only did he want to represent himself, his own lawyers actually tried to get off the case because they just had no communication.
Pam Bondi has just sent this out on social media regarding the verdict. She says today's guilty verdict against would-be Trump assassin Ryan Ruth illustrates the Department of Justice's commitment to punishing those who engage in political violence. This attempted assassination was not only an attack on our president, but an affront to our very nation. Gosh, Catherine, between the stabbing in the neck and the fact that he represented himself, it's hard to keep up here. Let me read a little bit more from inside the courtroom. So he had a pen in his right hand. He tried jabbing himself in the neck. His daughter started screaming, "Dad, don't hurt yourself. We'll get you out. Don't." Two of the bailiffs ran to him and took him out of the courtroom. Daughter started screaming, "What, the F word?" George, do we have an idea if Ryan Ruth is okay or where he is right now?
Yeah, we're still trying to get some of that information. What we did see is his daughter leaving the courtroom. Our team actually was there as she appeared to be running down. Of course, there's a gaggle of reporters, you can imagine, all trying to get a comment from her after this happened. And she is just seen there in a white dress, making a run for it, essentially. She seems very emotional, very, as you can imagine, just hyped up by everything that just transpired. But we are looking to get some more information about Ryan Ruth's condition, pending what we just found out happened there in the courtroom. As you mentioned, we know that after the verdict was read, he was stabbed there. And I can really just add some color just based on what I saw earlier when he was giving his closing arguments there. I mean, he did seem a little flustered. He did seem frustrated. He was obviously very abrupt when he was cut off by Judge Eileen Cannon. He struggled at one point. He did stop speaking as he was trying to, what it seems like, gather his thoughts as he was asked to move on to the next thing, move on to the next thing. And again, right before I had to leave the courtroom, Judge Eileen Cannon giving him 5 more minutes to essentially wrap up his argument. Her claim to him or statement to him was that all of this characterization of your character really has no bearing in what your closing argument here is. And of course, now we're finding out shortly after the verdict was read. But again, we are obviously trying to stay on top of this. Our team is still in the courtroom trying to get us more information about Ryan Ruth and his condition. But we do know now that his daughter is out of the courtroom as she took off immediately after all of this happened. Katie.
So what happens when somebody tries to harm themselves after a verdict like this and say, after they get medical treatment and are okay, where are they then placed, Catherine?
They will be put on suicide watch because we saw what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. He was supposed to be on that, where you are isolated and there should be 24-hour the correction officers monitoring you. And obviously, if he needs it, and clearly he needs it, psychiatric help, getting that. But he will be monitored to make sure he doesn't hurt himself. And, if there are sheets or anything that he could use to harm himself, they will take all of that away because their job is to make sure that he is safe and in being protected from himself. He's convicted, but still, you have to treat him humanely. And part of that treatment is to make sure you can do everything you can to not allow him to harm himself.
Would the judge, in a scenario like this, given the severity of the charges, the fact that he was found guilty on all 5 counts by his peers, if you take that alongside the behavior and then what just happened, do judges ever consider removing them from a, general population prison or even a separated area in a prison and put them into some sort of psychiatric facility? Forgive me, I'm trying to
Well,
understand this all as this is coming
yeah.
in.
Well, that will be determined by the Corrections Department, the Bureau of Prisons. Now, what Judge Cannon might do now, she did order that he have standby counsel, meaning, and she even said this to him, if you go off the rails too much, I may just stop you from being pro se, representing yourself, and bring in standby counsel. I think under these circumstances, she will have counsel be there to make arguments for his sentence and why he shouldn't get the maximum. So, because he clearly, unless he has miraculous recovery, will not be able to do that for himself. Will
Well,
not be
hold
able
on.
to
So
advocate
I have some notes on this. He tried to hurt himself with the pen. Apparently, he was aiming at an artery. He was not able to hurt himself. Marshals jumped on him immediately. And according to our producers inside the courtroom, he was not able to hurt himself.